Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business and future affairs. Market wars, analysis, industries and insights, we've got you covered right here on Niaga Spotlight. Well, today we are taking a deep dive and analysing everything COP28. So without further ado, joining me in the studios live is Yang Berhormat Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad, who's of course made time for us just pretty much fresh after landing from COP28 to discuss all things Malaysia's climate agenda moving forward from here. Yang Berhormat, thank you so much for making time for us. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. So I think first and foremost, of course, congratulations are in order. And from there, I would love to begin the conversation by starting off about you telling us in perhaps as much detail as you are able, what exactly is under your purview now under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability.
Yeah, hi. So under the new Ministry NRES, basically, the aspects that you have under natural resources, i.e. land, forests, conservation, wildlife, minerals, what do you call that, Department of Irrigation and Drainage, that basically falls under natural resources, and environmental sustainability is on the side of the Department of Environment and also the climate change aspects. This mirrors closely to a few years back when there was NRE.
Correct, that's right.
And Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment and KETA. So the other ministry is basically mirrors what KETA did last time.
And any thoughts on the fact that, well, of course, climate change falls under environmental sustainability, however, not having that as part of the title of the ministry itself, will there be any changes that you perceive?
Well, I think, for us, the name is not there, but I think sustainability also provides a bigger sort of approach to it. Climate change is obviously crucial. We were, in the recent COP28, we were very much active and vocal, and I think, people noticed Malaysia's presence there. But now the fact that it's now put under sustainability, and this is the first time I believe that sustainability is in a ministry's name, is the fact that it gives us a broader look to the issue of the planetary crisis. Climate change is one of it, but there's also loss of biodiversity and there's environmental degradation. So now it's seen as in a complete way.
Absolutely. Right. So from there, to ease us into the conversation, of course, what are some of your main takeaways before we get a little more granular, having come right back from COP28? You, of course, led what definitely was Malaysia's biggest ever contingent going into COP28, those 2 weeks or so that was spent there on the ground in Dubai. What were some of the most interesting things for us as Malaysia that were developing?
Well, I think as a whole, COP28, I think it was positive. The COP28 presidency, we understand that obviously there were a lot of questions when the fact that the host is a major oil and gas player. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at the UAE consensus that came about, this is the first time that the word fossil fuel is mentioned. In Glasgow, obviously in Sharm el-Sheikh, there were attempts to put it there. In Glasgow, we managed to put coal.
Correct.
But there's still other fossil fuels, and this time the word transitioning away from fossil fuels. So there's the whole debate, face down, face out, and so on and so forth. But I think that's still significant. It points us in the right direction. Obviously, we have to build on that, coming to the future COPs, for us to go closer to reach what we plan to under the Paris Agreement. But it puts us on the right footing. And secondly, I think what's also positive, loss and damage. It's this fund to help the poorer countries. There's been a lot of talk and demands for it, but this time it has actually been actualized. And I think, of course, there are things that we think can be improved, but the fact that we've seen substantial pledges from some of not just the developed world, but also the rich countries like the UAE itself, is a positive start. Obviously, some of the developed world could have done more, and that is a major issue that we've been facing the last many years. But the actualization of loss and damage, I think, is another positive step forward.
Absolutely. And further from that, YB Nik Nazmi, let's break down about the global stock take, which was also one of the things which was a first-time precedent happening at this COP28. What exactly does it mean, broken down into the kind of vocabulary for, of course, especially the business community and the average rakyat?
Well, the global stock take is for us to measure the journey that we are on to realize the pledges that we made, since Paris. And I think what is, because it's important for us, one, you have to have the target, the pledges and whatnot, but then you have to, every few years, you have to reflect on what's being done for us to reach those targets, because setting targets is one thing, but to realize it is another thing, and that's where the gap often happens. So that is why we need the global stock take. And I think that's where the whole debate on fossil fuels, and when it was finally decided for a transition away from fossil fuels.
That's right.
So, I think that is an important part. But we all realize that it has to be the whole idea of climate justice has to be there. What we often see is that that the developing countries, the poorer countries, are being put very strict conditions with regards to climate policies. But when it comes to the developed world, countries that were responsible, they already destroyed not only their own forests and managed to exploit their own resources, but they also exploited our resources for decades, if not centuries. Suddenly, they are allowed to be pragmatic about it.
Correct, exactly. And I think I'm really appreciative of the fact that you're highlighting climate justice, particularly if we look at Malaysia's own carbon emissions. We only contribute to 0.5% overall. So drawing from there, Yang Berhormat, let's go into when it comes to reducing carbon emissions. What is the space that we are at currently at the end of 2023, and how do we move forward, particularly with all that has already been laid out via the NETR that you and your ministry have also worked very hard on over the past year especially?
Well, I think when it comes to look at what we've achieved, we are preparing our LT-LETS, our long-term low-emission development strategy that should be ready by early 2024. We've also made announcements when earlier this year I said that our approach will be no new coal.
Correct. That's under JPET 2022.
Correct, and we are also going to. The government will also look at JPET 2023 under the new minister. But we've had the discussions at the JPET level, but it has to be presented by the new minister to cabinet. So I think that we make very much different assumptions on what was traditionally planned before. So more focus on solar as per outlined by NETR. So I think that will be making a lot of difference. But I think at the end of the day, we are also looking at how we realize that we need to, for example, strengthen our grid.
Yes,
because,
absolutely. It's
because
all
when you
about
have
the grid.
more variable RE coming in, it's not the same as having a few big power plants that are baseload, gas or gas or coal. But now you have small houses and properties with solar plants up. So it's different, and we see that other countries also face that problems. So I think that is a major part that we are looking at. It's a major investments that we have to do. Then it's also the other part. Something that we are fortunate is that we have an enormous carbon sink, and that must be protected as much as possible. We committed to 50% of our land area being forest and tree cover in 1992. So far, we have about 54%, but we have to guard it very carefully so that we can maintain that, because that's not what not many countries have enormous carbon sinks.
That's true. I mean, just drive in the Malaysian countryside, etc.,
Yeah.
even along the highways tells us that. Moving deeper into the carbon sink ethos, YB, let's look at the fact that whatever it is, our rainforests, of course, are part of that carbon sink. However, there have been recent issues raised around how do we also include palm oil plantations, etc., as part of that carbon sink. Yes or no? What are the ministry's thoughts on this, particularly looking at the fact that now you are also in charge of looking at natural resources itself?
Well, I think to include palm oil as a carbon sink is a bit controversial and challenging. I mean, scientifically it is. Obviously, then the argument is that it came about from it used to be pristine jungles, right? And that was a superior carbon sink, and the process of clearing up, planting up palm oil means that there is a loss of carbon in the process.
Mostly the loss of biodiversity.
Biodiversity
itself.
and then you put in fertilizers and all that. But I think so I don't want to go into that debate because that's a whole contentious debate about whether palm oils are carbon sinks or not. We can take the conservative view that it isn't, but we also have to acknowledge, Malaysia has come up with policies of capping our palm oil. So we have already put a cap to the size of land in our country that can be used for palm oil, one. Secondly, we have Malaysian Sustainability Palm Oil Standards, which is now almost universally adopted in the country.
That's right.
And we also have to recognize that palm oil, you compare it with any other competitor vegetable oil, is the most efficient. It has the highest concentration of energy. So it means that if you want to plant an equivalent soy or sunflower, you need a larger acreage of land.
Or even coconut, for example.
Or, for example, coconut. So you need larger area of land. You need to clear up bigger amount of forest to do that. You need more water. You need more resources, basically. So in that sense, palm oil is superior than any other vegetable oil. So I think that is where, but you do face, because you have lobbies from other competitor oils, and it's so ingrained now. And also we have been recognized, Malaysia and Indonesia, the deforestation from palm oil has gone down tremendously. And Malaysia is one of the top countries in reduced deforestation in the study by University of Maryland. So, but you go, when I was in Dubai, I wanted to buy chocolates for my kids, and you go and you see so many of them trying to portray their palm oil free.
The ingredients,
right?
right?
The ingredients,
Yeah,
and that is
correct.
being sold as a virtue when
it's not necessarily
it's
true.
Not necessarily true.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for highlighting that, YB. And let's move from there into looking at the reduction of carbon emissions, particularly from the energy and industrial sectors, which of course account for the bulk of Malaysia's total carbon emissions.
Yeah. So for energy, as mentioned, we already say no new coal. The challenge for us is that we in most Asian countries is the fact that most of our coal plants are young. So any efforts to terminate
the life cycle.
The life cycle, so you compare with the ones in Europe, is already quite mature. So it's easier for them to have early retirement. And we saw, even the mothball power plants in Europe, the moment Ukraine started and the prices of energy went up,
that's right.
they started to access that coal-based energy again. So when I was invited at COP28 to discuss this with President Macron of France and also John Kerry, the climate envoy for the US, the Prime Minister of Vietnam was there, von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission was there. So I highlighted this, but at the same time, and I hope that this, of course, is subject to the discussions of within the new ministry. Is we were planning to put in under JPAT 2023 will be a request for information on how we can reduce carbon emissions from coal. So this can be done by early retirement. This can be done by mothballing. i.e. they operate at a very minimal level with much reduced emissions, but in the moment, say, we need energy...
naturally we do.
We can just raise it up again. So that's... or you can even do co-firing with ammonia or with biomass, like any waste from palm.
Brown to green swaps,
and brown to green swaps. So those, it's being considered. That was at the level that we were discussing last time, but now it's obviously subject to the new minister to bring that up. And other forms of it is obviously, I think for us, I mean, we've managed it under our 1 year of being 1 year of me being there. We've gone through a few tariff proposals, and even yesterday, Datuk Sri Fadila asked me to present for the next ICPT cycles. So we've gone through a continuous subsidy, what do you call that, retargeting, where the rich are getting less and less subsidies. The bigger companies are also getting less and less subsidies, or even almost none. So this allows people to be more energy efficient. We must remember that's always the first fuel of energy transition. It's not renewable energy, but energy efficiency. So that's happening, and also that they are using more renewable energy as well. So they are, like, if you see now, a lot more factories are putting up solar houses. Last time it may take 7 years or 10 years for you to break even with your investment, but now you can get it in 3 to 5 years because tariffs are higher and solar panels are cheaper. So I think we are seeing that happening, and I think that will contribute a lot in line with the NETR objectives. Now we are 25% renewable energy capacity. By 2050, the target is 70%.
Absolutely, and it's also not something that we'll see the impact of immediately, but the mechanisms have already been put in place. Great, fantastic. From there, YB, let's go into looking at the fact that COP28 has also recognized food and agricultural systems contributing up to 1/3 of all emissions by countries. What are some of Malaysia's challenges as well as solutions or opportunities for looking at decreasing our emissions from food production itself?
Yeah, I think in Malaysia, the main culprits, if you're talking about agriculture, actually in Malaysia, agriculture contributes a relatively low amount. But the challenges come from synthetic fertilizers, it comes from pesticides and also other chemicals. And we have the National Agro-Food Policy and National Agri-Commodity Policy, which sustainability is also embedded in these two policies in terms of developing agriculture policies. So I think for what the government is trying to do is also, one is the ministry under of Agriculture and Food Security. They're trying to promote organic farming as well, because that will reduce the need for chemical fertilizers, which has higher emissions. At the same time, we are looking at also trying to upgrade and expand the sustainable palm oil standards, because with that, we can also have a more sustainable and more efficient mode of farming. So I think that those are among the efforts that we are trying to do to make our agriculture sector much more, to be much more environmental friendly and to have less impact on climate.
Sure. I like the fact that organic produce is also highlighted, but of course that is about scaling so that it's made a lot more affordable for everyone to purchase as well. Right. So from looking at food and agricultural systems, Yang Berhormat, any thoughts about how when it came to COP28, some of the focus areas also looked at people and livelihoods and inclusion of local communities and in particular, of course, indigenous groups. Now, any thoughts about how moving forward, Malaysia can best adhere to not just this ethos, not only because of COP28, but of course because it's beneficial for our local communities as well?
Definitely. I mean, I think we've realized that the indigenous communities in Malaysia, whether it's the Orang Asli in the Peninsula or the Orang Asal in Sabah and Sarawak, a lot of them are living at the front lines when you talk about with our forests or even with our oceans. So they feel it firsthand, right? When there are deforestation, when there is a human-wildlife conflict, a lot of them will be the first hand victims. So the government has been, throughout the years, we have done many efforts. I mean, when I took over, we started a consultative panel on climate change, and we took NGOs, not just the environmental NGOs per se.
That's right.
We also took youth environmental NGOs, but also the indigenous NGOs to give their input. And we will look how we can, refresh this composition to get more voices. We had some of them there at COP COP28, speaking not only in our panels but also in other countries.
And how was that
panels.
received in general?
It was very positive, and I think the other policy that has gained a lot of attention is our community rangers, where now we have 1,500. Next year we are targeting 2,000, and the majority today of the 1,500 are actually from the Orang Asli. So they basically, it's a boots on the ground sort of approach. We know that our wildlife in particular are facing poaching, and we have our own enforcement officers from the wildlife department, but it's a limited number. So by having this, it helps to put boots on the ground, and that has been very positive. And also there are other NGOs or state bodies such as in Royal Belum, there's the Menrak Rangers, right. And all this have been they've been receiving international recognition at various awards. So I think that has been something that is very positive, and it also helps them, give them a purpose, livelihood while they work on this program. So I think involving them is very, very critical, and tapping onto their traditional knowledge and wisdom is sometimes it can help us fill the gaps. If you take purely, sometimes you take a very academic
or very scientific
approach without understanding the gaps of people who are, it's not the same when you are in an ivory tower or in Putrajaya compared to when you have been there, you've lived there for generations, thousands of years, right? So I think it's very valuable to have them as partners in our journey towards sustainability.
Yeah, it's very heartening to hear that expanding capacity for environmental stewardship by the indigenous Orang Asli and Asal communities is a highlight.
And if I can add shortly, is the fact that one of the interesting things that I learned from Menrak, for example, when they wanted to recruit the local Orang Asli community there, what has been interesting is that then they had to do programs not just for the rangers, but also the community in terms of education, teaching, because some of them may even not be able to read and write, for example. So if to be a
literacy as well.
Yeah, so literacy, use of technology, and that has an important, the spillover effects are enormous. So it's not just about them getting that 2,000 ringgit or 1,500 ringgit a month, but it's also about them having the knowledge that can be useful for them and their community in a bigger scale.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that as well, Yang Berhormat. We take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with the rest of the interview with Yang Berhormat, Nik Nazmi, Nik Ahmad on COP28. Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, and today, of course, we are discussing COP28 and Malaysia's path moving forward. Yang Berhormat, so continuing the discussion, let's look now and zone in on Altera, which of course is the $30 billion catalytic climate investment fund that was launched at COP28. Some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, Altera is basically trying to leverage on private markets to invest when it comes to climate investments, and I think it will play an important role. And obviously money is the crucial thing, especially for developing countries. Malaysia alone, the calculation is from 2023 to 2050, we need 1.2 trillion ringgit. So that's a big amount.
Yes.
We still need to spend money on schools, we need to spend money on roads, we need to spend money on welfare, and so on and so forth, hospitals. So we can't, our annual budget now is 200 over billion ringgit. But
it's just about balancing everything.
Yes, that's a big challenge, and so for us, I think why this Altera and all that will be very crucial is because we need to fill in the gaps, right? Energy transition alone, you need about 637 billion ringgit under the last calculation. So, and we can't put all of that on the burden of ordinary Malaysians, right? Because we can't be paying tariffs that are too high, at least for the B40 or the M40. we can't be paying taxes that are too high either, right? So I think that's the challenge that we face. And the other thing is that, interestingly, just to draw on that, is the fact that since 2009, but in 2015, if you take, they were more firm, the commitment of about the developed world committing $100 billion a year to help the poorer countries to go through climate, the effects of climate change. But if you calculate, we should have more, from 2009, we should have more than $1 trillion
already.
$1 trillion dollars, right,
yeah.
in the bank. But there's only $80 billion. Not even enough for that 1 year of $100 billion. So I think that's why loss and damage is very critical. And the fact that, yes, we've had some progress during COP28, but with the other things that we raise is, one is that now it is only least developed countries and small island states are eligible for it. One can argue about Malaysia, and that's a long argument, fine, because we are high middle income. But if you took only this definition, it means that even countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, do not qualify.
Exactly.
And they
and
suffer
you
a
also
lot
have
of,
to look at the fact that we are a peninsula. So naturally also the headwinds, the monsoon cycles.
It's different from a landlocked country and all that.
Sure.
So I think that is something that we want to raise. And the other thing is that as of now, I think it's being held by the World Bank. And again, our call is that we have no issue, but it should not be just one bank. We know the World Bank, it's everything, a lot of things are being decided by the US there. There's a lot of red tape. And I raised this, for example, with European diplomats in Malaysia when I met them before COP, and they were open. There's the European Investment Bank, there's the Asian Development Bank, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, for example, and the African Development Bank. Why can't these banks too be able to have access to this fund? So, then people will feel that it's easier countries will find that it's easier to have access and there's less red tape. So, I mean, those are the things that we think can help us improve climate financing.
Well, there are also other countries, especially from our general sector, middle income nations, who also echoed your calls as well, YB, to look at multiple stakeholders when it comes to financing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of countries were very supportive of that approach.
Now, Vietnam has also, interestingly enough, the government has subscribed to the JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership Deal. What do we understand about it insofar? And could that perhaps be something for the Malaysian government to subscribe to?
So that was, I think, announced at COP28, and I was there with the Prime Minister of Vietnam during the same meeting. It's called the Coal Transition Accelerator announcement with President Macron and John Kerry. So, Indonesia last year, I think, was announced as another recipient of the program. So basically, it's the developed world are promising that they will assist for some early retirement or phase out of coal for developing countries. The Philippines have had some plans with the Asian Development Bank on the same thing. But it's a very complicated thing. I mean, like I said, I mean, even in Indonesia, there's still a lot of discussions about how to actually realize this objective. So what I said then, we want to see how it's being done in Vietnam, in Indonesia, to see the progress. Then we will decide whether we want to take part or not. But we are also doing our RFI on decarbonization of coal, so that we are also looking at ways of how going beyond not just no new coal plants, but early retirement, or some form of decarbonization for coal can be achieved. So I think that is something that we look at. We are open to the ideas, but the challenge has always been that the young coal plants and all that provides a very costly effect for us to do all this, to look at these measures.
Absolutely. And moving in a little bit deeper to look at climate finance, more from a cost-benefit economic analysis viewpoint. Yang Berhormat, I must point out that all current instruments are mainly looking towards loans or debt-related, which of course then the burden once again falls upon the countries which have had contributed the least to it. What do you feel about the likelihood of us moving towards globally a shift towards an equitable share of global taxes, perhaps measures that would not involve increasing the fiscal risk, particularly for countries in our region?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the major criticism that the developing world has, right? Not only we least responsible, most of the countries in the developing world are still living within the planetary limits, or even, we have communities, even in Malaysia, but particularly in poorer countries where they don't even meet the basic levels, right? I mean, you have other people who, in the rich countries, they are having
the 1%. So
the 1%.
Sure.
They have their jets, they have their EVs, they have their 10 aircons, swimming pools. But you have on the other end people who are still relying on generators to study at night. And they still have, I mean, even in our country, people who rely on wells to get their access to water. So I think that is where this whole criticism about further burdening the developing world, so we find it ironic that the developed world, they lecture us, they hector us about climate change, and we have to follow this.
We suffer the brunt of it.
Yeah, and we suffer the worst brunt of it, but and we have to follow all these rigid rules and whatnot. But then suddenly, when it comes to when there's an increase in energy prices, or there's a war, or they just found some new, what do you call that, oil fields, suddenly they can be pragmatic about it, right? And so I think that is a major hypocrisy. So yes, and that's why, to me, more loans is not the solution, ideally. And I think we will, try to work within the G77 and China group, within the various other groups as well, to find a solution to this. And I met the Brazilian environment minister, who's she's an activist, long-standing activist, former presidential candidate, and we spoke at length at that, and trying to find a solution that is just and fair to everyone.
Absolutely. So speaking of solutions which are just and fair to everyone, Yang Berhormat, let's move into looking at building climate resilience in especially the climate fragile scenario that we're seeing. We've had multiple flash floods just this year alone, just this month alone itself, even though it's only just early December. Let's talk about the fact of whether we do collect any gender disaggregated data, since of course global statistics also go on to show that within fragile communities, underserved communities, once again, women are then the ones who suffer the brunt of the impacts.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from the data that we have so far, I believe there have been efforts to look at gender segregated data, but it's still at a very early stage to look at this, because definitely, I mean, if we can have more granular data, if we can have a much more multidimensional framework for data, that will allow us then to be able to come up with better solutions, right? Because every segment of the community is unique. We know that women, they tend to be also the biggest victims when it comes to climate catastrophes. So I think that is something that we're still developing. Similarly, things about children, that is also a data that sometimes, if you just report on it on a general basis, that it gets lost. You don't really understand the whole impact of it. And that is something that we have to work on. And I think now the technology allows us to do so. In the past it will be so tedious and difficult, but it can. And we are working to look at that angle as well.
That's very heartening, especially because aside from just women and children, even the elderly or the disabled stuck in flood-prone situations are the ones most impacted. I just wanted to highlight also that recent data that came out from Bomba, our fire services, identified in excess of 5,000 odd sites around Malaysia, which are the most flood-prone. Sarawak, of course, came in as one of the most flood-prone states, followed by Sabah, Pahang, Johor, Kelantan. So these heavy rains, flash floods, etc., that we we've especially been seeing more exacerbated, we definitely feel, over the past 2 to 3 years. What are some thoughts, perhaps even initially, looking at the fact that when it comes to environmental sustainability, this is something likely your ministry will be able to look at in much deeper detail?
Yeah, so I think we've shifted our approach now, and you know, we for example, I had an event with the former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte.
Right.
When he came over. Malaysia has a collaboration with the Netherlands when it comes to dealing with floods, and you know, the Netherlands is world famous for how they built their country.
Yes.
Yeah, their boulders and dikes. So. And I think, and you know, so and even in Malaysia, for example, one of our most important achievements was the what do you call that, the smart tunnel that we have in KL, and that has averted floods that used to happen in the city centre. But there is a limit to grey infrastructure. We are still investing a lot. I mean, I think in our accelerated flood projects, about 11 billion ringgit. For flood mitigation, you know, and that's happening. I mean, we can't rule out grey infrastructure, but we also have to look at nature-based solutions, at green approaches. You know, when you are now, we are covering almost our entire cities with roads and pavements and hard surfaces. Then obviously, you know, you're going to accelerate the speed of water that goes into the waterways, right? And that also creates floods. So those are things that we have to work around. You know, how we can use natural features that blend in with the environment in order, and some of them can be cheaper to deal with these problems on a long-term basis. And I think this is an approach that is now being looked at by Plan Malaysia, by the KPKT ministry, but also by our ministry, so that we can have a more holistic approach to fighting these floods.
Exactly, green solutions as well. Now, it's also interesting, I just wanted to bring it up, the fact that actually creating green jobs can actually be far more sustainable and create more opportunity than even oil and gas. Any thoughts about how this should look like within the medium to long term for Malaysia, especially as we are really looking at transitioning away from, of course, coal and fossil fuels?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that we have to think of, because I think you know, we have a very well-developed oil and gas sector. It's a lucrative job. It's a highly skilled job, and it's a job where you know, where I think, you know, Malaysia has done well in terms of getting people to work in that sector, they are well paid, and now some of them are going to the Middle East, the US, Russia, and whatnot to work in oil and gas, and that's a major success. So when I mean, the signs are clear now. The fact that in COP28, you know, that word of transition away from fossil fuels. So, and I know that, for example, Petronas is investing a lot in the transition as well. So, how do we convert this lucrative fossil fuel jobs into productive green jobs is a crucial thing, and this can be done. You know, obviously, I think almost the direct similarity you can find with hydrogen, and that's another potential source of green energy, but also things like possibly nuclear and even what do you call that, solar panel installations and whatnot are relatively similar. In our country, we don't find it viable yet, but TNB, for example, has invested in wind turbines in UK, and those are jobs which the offshore ones are just similar to the ones that you work in offshore oil fields in some of the jobs. So I think that those are things that we have to plan properly, because otherwise...
So we're not taken by surprise or a loss of course, income and industries.
Yeah, and we've seen that. I mean, we've seen the backlash in the UK. You've had this strong cross-party consensus since the days of the Labour Party, Gordon Brown, 2008. Then you had a series of Conservative prime ministers, and they were all relatively agreeable with regards to the climate change policies. Then suddenly, we had a recent by-election, and because of they wanted to introduce the ultra-low emission zone for cars to be slow and for old cars to be scrapped. Then there was a backlash.
And decommissioning so many cars.
Yes, and a lot of both politicians on both sides suddenly now are scared of environmental policies. So I think it's important, because at the end of the day, I think while a lot of people are now being more aware, especially the young, with regards to climate change and environmental sustainability, but the general public is still more concerned on bread and butter issues. And that's not a Malaysian thing, it's a global thing.
Of course.
So and you can see even in the US, what Biden did is the Inflation Reduction Act. That was basically the legislation to bring in more green investments and whatnot. They did not call it as a green policy or whatnot, but as an Inflation Reduction Act. They linked it to energy independence and more jobs for the people.
Very clear indeed. And perhaps if we could spend a minute or so speaking about expanding the wider net of climate injustice. Now, we would be remiss if we were not to mention, YB, the fact that climate injustice is also at the heart of many global conflicts. Let's look at how some of the gravest issues relating to the current, of course, Israeli occupation of Palestine and Gaza in particular, and how it also ultimately does connect back to climate as well as degradation of environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we raised that as well in Dubai, because I said that you can't, and it's not just me. You had South Africa, you had Turkey, you had a few South American countries.
That's right.
Talking about it, because you can't talk about climate change without talking about Palestine. Because if you look at Gaza, for example, one of the major statistics of the injustice that's happening there is like how much water does an Israeli citizen have as opposed to a Palestinian, and obviously that's a very environmentally sensitive area. Similarly, the impacts of the bombings and whatnot, and it's a fight for resources, right, for people to get the best source of water and all that. So I think we need to look that, there was a saying, I think, by one of the international statesmen, that in the 20th century, the conflicts were about oil and gas. But in the 21st century, the conflicts will be about water, because the demand on water is getting higher. Water stress is prevalent across the world. Even in Malaysia, places where we did not see that, we wouldn't imagine that this would happen in Malaysia, now it's becoming more common. So when that happens, any place where there's water and all that will be a source of conflict. It will be the cause of violence and wars. So that is why it has to be managed properly. We need more multilateral understandings on these things, on sensitive matters, so that we can resolve these issues peacefully without going through conflicts.
And climate resilience, of course, to build that is a human right.
Yeah.
To end off, YB, with your last comments, moving forward as a brand new ministry, what can we expect for not just for the rest of 2023, but 2024 and beyond?
Well, I think we'll put a lot of focus with regards to the conservation of our forests, our wildlife. Malaysia has just joined the Big Cats Alliance, which is headed by India, and India has a very successful program with regards to restoring the wild tiger and lion populations. So it's something that we can emulate. Conservation of our forests. We need to keep up the positive trends of reduced deforestation, and hopefully eventually put a stop to it, because we are 54%, we promised 50%, so we need to guard it very carefully. And then obviously on the other side of the coin, on environmental sustainability and climate change, we need to update our laws. It's something that I've started working on when I became Minister of NRECC, so I hope to continue that, because our environmental, the current law that we have, is it came from the 1970s.
Sure.
And it was more of a public health lens rather than a proper environmental lens, because it was very new. Even in the UK and US, they just started having the environment ministers at that time. So I think we need to update that to cater to the demands of today. Plastics, now hopefully I can put more focus on reducing single-use plastics, and where we cannot avert, then really biodegradable plastics to be ready there to replace all single-use plastics, and then and then obviously climate change to get that to be really embedded with all our policies.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ahmad, for your time, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we've got time for today on Niaga Spotlight. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji signing off for now. We'll be back, of course, next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.